Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Upper East Side for Black Lives Matter organization and Sanjay Coleman and everyone for having me this evening. And thank you all for being here and rallying and supporting Black lives every day. So, in addition to being a primary care physician, I'm also a leader in a growing Creating Our Mental Health movement, and I want to thank my colleagues and friends, all of them, and also from the Eastside Institute for being here this evening. Creating Our Mental Health is a movement that believes that human emotional growth is vitally important to our ability to change the world. That critical to making Black lives matter is to create community, to build community in which caring for the lives of Black people, caring for the lives of people of color, for the lives of the poor, for the lives of Black trans people and the LGBTQ, for the lives and well-being of the dispossessed, that this is at the heart and soul of what we're doing and of social change and of what we want our democracy to be. I want to speak tonight about my own personal journey of emotional development and why I hope that you will join me in the work of furthering development and creating environments for all of us to step out, to come out, to grow and develop. I know something about the emotional impact of poverty, of social isolation, and violence. Growing up in the Black community of South Philadelphia, we lived in the rooms above my grandmother's soul food restaurant, which was very much a part of the inner city underground sub-economy of drugs, crime, and prostitution. As a child, I faced abuse myself. I saw violence against women, and I became very withdrawn, very introverted, and unable to play at that time. And I remember these experiences to my bones. I remember at around age 9 or 10, seeing my mother very upset, her hands violently shaking. She was holding down several jobs, including working in a factory and doing hair on the weekends and working in a bar, and she became overwhelmed, and she attempted suicide. My sister was introduced to heroin as a teenager and was not able to stop drug use for over 10 years. She turned to cigarettes, and she now has advanced emphysema, and she is right now fighting to live. This kind of suffering is prevalent in Black communities, in Latinx, Native American, and other communities of color all across this country and around the world. Such devastating trauma, tragedy, and pain due to racism, to poverty, violence. Traditional mental health does not touch this pain. Traditional mental health treatment in communities of color doesn't touch this pain, and moreover, relates to people as victims. People are too often labeled, medicated, they may be institutionalized, they're related to as if they do not have the capacity to reinitiate their development, and as if they have no capacity to collectively change the conditions of their lives. I have been a community organizer for many years, and my own emotional growth has occurred through building and participating in environments, including therapeutic environments, that make use of performance, not simply on a stage or on a platform, but using performance in everyday life. I was in one of those environments a few weekends ago when I joined about 50 activists, including Sandrea Coleman, in a series of virtual sessions and play practicums on the how of performance activism. Performance activism links performance inextricably to human and community empowerment. Performance and play in supportive environments is a process that allows people to break out of alienation and segregation of all sorts. Performance activism is international, and it is originating and growing from outside of traditional institutions, as is the movement for Black lives. That outsidedness, that otherness, that strong articulation that Black lives matter, that strong articulation that Black lives matter is fundamental to a qualitatively humane transformation of our world. The current dominant structures in politics and mental health, for example, the two major parties and the psychiatric and mental health institutions, do not allow for the full support of Black lives. The demand for structural transformation is coming from outside of those institutions. And though they may make slight adjustments, these institutions cannot transform from within. That is why I am an independent. Let's keep going forward. Let's keep growing. Let's keep growing. Growing the capacity to go further than you could as an individual in your own particular circumstances that you grew up with or were exposed to. This is wonderfully developmental. And our work is to create the environments for that kind of development to happen. And those environments are group, collective, social environments. Everyone, including poor people, have that capacity to grow, to come out, to break out, and to lead. This historic moment is unique with the pandemic and the systematic failures exposed by the pandemic, the structural racism exposed, the racial violence by police exposed, and the outspoken support for Black lives from diverse communities, including from this community. The call for dismantling structural racism is being raised to policing and incarceration at universities, in corporations, in healthcare, in the arts, at museums, in theater, and other cultural institutions. Certainly, in this historic moment, transformation is on the agenda. But we cannot assume that it will happen unless we, the people, from the outside, impact on the social structures and institutions of our world. And we cannot transform the world in the absence of transforming ourselves. Yes, the transformation of the world has to include the transformation of our emotional lives. What is the emotional impact of all the violence that occurs every day in our world, and the violence against people of color? For Black people, the experience of not being heard, of being invisible, is very common. The trauma and pain of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many, many others, the long and ongoing police violence extends beyond, even beyond the physical trauma, which is itself horrible and deadly, and it extends to emotional pain and intense fear and anxiety for many, many people. It is something that we as people have not had environments to express, to reveal. Together we can build environments to do that. From an inspiring Black woman, scientist, a sister and friend, Raquel Holmes, who is leading the creating of such environments. And she is stepping out to say, I am filled with a new emotion that comes with tears. I am filled with a new emotion that comes with tears. It was not possible to feel this before. We had not created the possibility for it to exist before. We have years and years of learning to be okay with knowing that our lives were considered less than others. Years of not looking directly at the constant threat of violence to our existence for being black. America's most prominent proponent of nonviolence was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote, and I quote, "The plantation and the ghetto were created by those who had power, both to confine those who had no power and to perpetuate their powerlessness. The problem of transforming the ghetto is, therefore, a problem of power, a confrontation between the forces of power demanding change and the forces of power dedicated to preserving the status quo," unquote. We are now confronting the forces of power dedicated to the status quo, to preserving the status quo. So let's create our power and transform the conditions of this world. The time is now. Yes, let's create our power. The time is now. We care, we march, we protest, we build. The coming out fully for black people leads the transformation for all people. Amen. All power to the developing.